Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about Brent Venables. He just got a big time contract extension and raise to stay at Oklahoma through about 2029. So, a huge addition for Oklahoma. Definitely will be a very interesting thing to watch as they walk into the SEC. But let's get into this June signing day. It is expected to be shot down later this week when they vote on it. And I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of that. I think there's a ton of things that are wrong with the college football calendar right now. There are so many things that happen in months that they probably don't need to happen in, frankly. The month of December is absolutely ridiculous. We talked about it when we talked about the Steve Sarkisian interview with Joel Klatt, which is he essentially said it was the hardest month that he's ever had to deal with as a head coach. And I totally believe him. It was an absolute nightmare last December with a ton of different things going into it and a lot of different problems. So it'll be fascinating to watch how that changes down the road, and I'll get into that a little bit later on. But this was an idea that was kind of hatched from that kind of need for the schedule in general to just be altered just a little bit and make it a little bit easier on some people. So one of the ideas was a proposed signing day in June, and it would allow it would allow any recruits that are fully locked in, feel fully comfortable with where they are committed to and want to be at, to just sign their letter of intent, be totally done before they go into their senior season, and that'll be that. They'll be a part of that organization, and it'll be pretty much over from there. Would be a very interesting thing, obviously. It would have started in 2025, so we would have had a year to kind of get used to the idea and figure out kind of the different impacts of it. Some high school coaches across, Georgia, Bama, some other states, some big-time recruiting states, were not in favor of this for a couple of different reasons. One of the big reasons is there's a lot of kids that absolutely have to, do some certain things that in let's put it this way. There are certain things that happen throughout a kid's kind of journey, and I think a lot of it. Oh, excuse me, I apologize for this. But let's just do that. But the December signing period is obviously a very, very crazy one. It's kind of become the main one after February was the only one on the calendar for quite some time, and then they moved one to December. That's become kind of the one to watch throughout this time. And then there's the idea of adding one in June. And frankly, I'm mostly in favor of this. I think it makes things a little bit easier on the coaches, obviously, to have maybe, it's not going to be a lot of guys, but maybe, 3 to 5 guys entirely locked up. You don't have to worry about them. Just have to, check up on them every now and then, make sure that everything's good and keep moving on with your day. And you can focus on other guys in recruiting and focus on the games, which is something that I'm sure every single coach would love to do. But there is kind of a downside to this, and the downside that a lot of high school coaches have kind of pointed out is for some kids, that senior season is really huge. It's not necessarily the biggest season. That junior season tends to be the recruiting time for pretty much every single high school sport, but the senior season can be huge for some kids. There's some kids that work really hard and go to a couple of camps before their senior season and then walk onto the field and get a couple of offers that they were not expecting when they were coming into the season. And I think it's a huge thing that we have to think about, right? You don't want to cut out kids from an opportunity that hypothetically they would have. And on the other side, you don't want teams to tie themselves to, let's say, a running back that they really like, and then someone comes on their radar that they like even more, and that guy, they'd rather have that guy on the roster. And then you have somewhat of a messy situation when it comes to you sign your national letter of intent. Do you want to be released from it? Does the team want you to release from it? A lot of different things that could happen because of this. And I think I fully understand the worry of that. But I also do think the vast majority of kids will not use this window. The vast majority of kids will wait until December or February to sign, regardless of if this is in place or not. But I do think giving them the chance to sign if they feel totally confident and if they feel, like they've entirely made the right decision and just kind of want to go through, fully focus on their senior season, I think they should have the option to do that. I fully understand that it opens up some worries. Maybe they get injured that final season and have, their entire football career kind of changed a little bit because of that injury and some things pop up. But the reality is that's not going to happen too often for this to be that much of an issue. I think there's going to be examples of kids that sign their letter of intent and then try to get released from it in fall. But at the end of the day, that happens anyway. But it happens in spring when it's a lot harder for these kids to find a roster spot across the country. So it doesn't necessarily make me too upset if it were to be where 5 kids sign but 3 ask for a release from their letter of intent. At the very least, those 3 kids can go find a home before, all of the classes are solidified. So I think it's kind of a battle in between the two. I fully understand the arguments on the other side, but also you can decide as a school if you want to use this. You can say to the kids when they, commit or whatever, you can say, don't sign in June. We want to play this out a little bit more. We want to make sure that you are fully on board. And if you feel, totally inclined to do it, you're more than welcome to. But there are these risks, and we don't necessarily want to incur those risks if we don't have to. So there definitely could be kind of a give and take here where some schools really want to use it. I assume it would be the smaller schools that want to lock up some kids that might have recruitments that kind of blow up a little bit over the summer of their senior season and all that type of stuff, and get a couple offers that would be too hard to turn down. And I definitely think this would kind of be a running scale of how this would work, but overall, it just looks like it's not going to come to fruition here. It'll be very interesting to see if this is something that kind of happens as we go down the road a little bit and kind of get a little bit further into the craziness that is the schedule. But as I talked about before, the problem with the schedule isn't necessarily this June signing period. As I said, it's going to be very rarely that kids really use it, so it really won't change too much about the recruiting process, at least for high school, during the season and into December. But one thing that will do, well, they already did one thing, which is move up the signing date to the first week of December, which makes everything just a little bit easier for the postseason. But the other thing they just have to do, in my opinion, and I fully understand if some other people have some different ones here, but I don't think the portal should open until after the national title game. I think it's unfair to pretty much everyone involved to have that open any earlier, because I think the reason we all love the bowl games and the postseason, and frankly, if the reason that it's been kind of taken away from us just a little bit over the last couple of years, is we're focusing on the portal. We're focusing on where is DJ Uyunglele going to end up? Where is Cam Ward going to end up? Where is Malik Murphy and all these really talented guys? Where were they going to end up last December? That's what a lot of the conversation was. That's what a lot of the articles were, and a lot of the talking points were on so many different talk shows around the country, and we weren't focusing on the postseason. And that's something that, obviously, I don't necessarily blame anyone for talking about the portal, because that's what people like to hear about. But the reality is that's not the way the postseason should work. There should be an emphasis on these bowl games and on the playoff games coming up and all of those different things. So pulling away from it by adding the portal into this craziness that is the aftermath of the college football season is just unfair to so many different people. I think one of the big things that I've talked about on here a number of times is there were a number of kids that would have stayed on their team if they had the choice. But frankly, with the way that the portal works right now, if you don't get in early, you might not get a spot. That's just kind of how it works. And it happened last year. The best example that I can think of off the top of my head is Malik Murphy, who transferred from Texas to Duke. He had to jump in before the semifinal. So Arch Manning was the backup for Texas in that semifinal game against Washington. And Malik Murphy had to get into the portal because so many other quarterbacks had flooded in. And it made it kind of impossible for him to not get in on the party, because if he didn't get in, he might have been relegated to Group of 5 school, which is not necessarily what he wanted. And no disrespect to Group of 5 schools, but Malik Murphy's a Power 4 quarterback, so he wanted to be at a big school, and he was kind of forced out of that position and didn't get to play with his teammates. So for me, it's just the calendar is one of the most important things for the future of the sport. Head coaches and coordinators are finding their way to the NFL not only because it's the top tier of football, but Because it's easier as a job. You work less hours. You don't necessarily have to worry about recruiting and making sure that all the kids get all the NIL money they want because they've signed contracts. You don't have to worry about that. There's so many different things that you have to juggle at the college level that you just don't at the NFL, and it's pushing guys in that direction. And we have to figure out the calendar to keep these guys intact. So whether it's moving the transfer portal a little bit, whether it's changing up some of the different ways we do signing days and all of that type of thing. I don't know what this looks like necessarily, but I know change has to happen. I know December has to be not the crazy, wild, I don't want to use a bad word, but the craziness that it is right now just can't be the case for much longer. So I think they should move the portal down the road a little bit. I think they should let kids play out the entirety of the postseason, and then the second the national championship ends, let them loose. That's more than fine with me. I have no problem with that. But that's an off-season thing. That should not be something that's happening during the season of college football. So it'll be kind of a battle back and forth. We'll see what happens with this. The June signing day is one that, if it gets shot down, it's not necessarily the worst thing in the world, but we got to do something about December, and it's probably got to happen fairly quickly, if I'm being totally honest. But let's take our third break here, and when we come back, we're going to do a little bit of a Heisman watch. We've been kind of doing segments throughout the last couple of weeks where we roll through all the conferences, do different things like dark horses and Cinderellas and things of that nature, but today we're going to do Heisman talk, and we're going to do it all the way throughout the week. We're going to do the SEC today, and there's going to be so many different things to break down in the SEC, but I have 5 guys for you, and then also a little dark horse to break down at the end. So it'll be very interesting to break all these guys down throughout the week, but stick with us, and we'll start with the SEC next time. So stick with us, and we'll be right back with that.